To begin our conversation, I would like to first give the floor to the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran, Javaid Rehman, who is joining us virtually.
Distinguished Ambassador, distinguished delegates, excellencies, and dear colleagues, I hope I am audible. I'll begin by saying that I noted in my report to the Human Rights Council earlier this year, and I quote from that report, I said, impunity and the absence of a system of accountability for violations of human rights permeate the political and legal system of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The absence of accountability derives from various deficiencies within state structures, including negation of the principles of rule of law and separation of powers. End of quotation. Excellencies, the current situation of human rights, in particular the tragedy facing Iran since 16th of September this year, is an unfortunate reflection of institutional impunity and absence of any accountability for violation of serious human rights. On 16 September, Jina Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old Iranian woman from the Kurdish minority, died in police custody 3 days after her arrest for allegedly failing to comply with Iran's strict rules on women's dress by wearing a so-called improper hijab. The state officials have produced various reports which they claim as investigations, and these reports all assert no misconduct or wrongdoing on the part of the state officials. These statements were all rejected by Jina Mahsa's family, whose request for the establishment of a committee of independent doctors to investigate her death was denied. Special procedures press release of 22nd September 2022 and other independent sources have pointed to reports that Ms. Amini was severely beaten up by the morality police, with her death reportedly occurring because of torture and ill treatment at the hands of the morality police. Contrary to the established provisions were also reportedly threatened by some accounts to death threats and have faced pressure by the authorities. It is clear that the so-called investigations into the death of Mahsa Amini have failed the minimum requirements of impartiality, independence, and transparency. The two journalists who first provided initial reports about Jina Mahsa Amini's death have been arrested and remain detained, facing accusations of being foreign agents engaged in espionage, which carries a death penalty. Excellencies, Jina Mahsa Amini was an unfortunate victim of state repression and brutality. Tragic as her killing was, Amini was not the first woman to face the brutality of the state police. Unfortunately, as witnessed in the cases of Nika Shah Karimi and others, she was not the last one. Women and girls in Iran have now for decades been brutalized by the violent application of this law of enforced hijab, with their self-respect and human dignity completely violated. Not only have they faced fines, imprisonment, but have also faced serious and draconian violations of their fundamental human rights. Age of criminal responsibility based on the age of maturity applies to girls at 9 lunar years. In many legal proceedings, a woman's testimony is half of the evidentiary value of that of a man, and the law exonerates violence against girls and women in a variety of ways. Women continue to face substantial discrimination in family laws, including in marriage, divorce, custody, and guardianship laws. Women also face considerable legally sanctioned discrimination in political and judicial positions, in employment, in sports, and in culture. The death of Jina Mahsa Amini led to waves of protests across the country and from all segments of society. Women and youth led the charge as they chanted, "Women, life and freedom." The initial wave of protests has developed into nationwide protests, incorporating the widespread resentment over violations of civil, political, as well as economic, social, and cultural rights. In an unfortunate yet predictable fashion, the authorities have responded to these protests by brutal repression of peaceful demonstrators and a shutdown of internet connections in a determined effort to stifling free speech and association of the Iranian population. More than 6 weeks since the wave of protests, the unabated violent response by security forces, including the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and military besieged forces, have led to the reported deaths of at least 277 persons. In the province of Sistan and Balochistan alone, reports after Friday prayers on 30th September indicate that at least 67 persons, including children, were killed. If confirmed, this would be the highest death from a single incident, the highest death toll from a single incident in the current protests. In Kurdistan region of Iran, dozens of people have also been killed. It is reported that at least 40 children, 40 children, some of them as young as 11, have been killed by live ammunition, metal pellets at close range, while some have been beaten to death. As reported recently by the Committee on the Rights of the Child, despite grieving for the loss of a child, many families were pressured to absolve security forces by declaring that their children had committed suicide and making false confessions. Over the past 6 weeks, thousands of men, women, and children, by some accounts over 14,000 persons, have been arrested, which includes human rights defenders, students, lawyers, journalists, and civil society activists. In another most disturbing development, Iranian authorities have announced just earlier this week that they will be holding public trials for over 1,000 arrested persons in Tehran and a similar number outside the capital. The charges against these persons would include charges of corruption on earth and waging war against death that carry the death penalty. Excellencies, in the absence of any domestic channels of accountability, I would stress the significance of the role and responsibility of the international community in addressing impunity for human rights violations in Iran. I would call for the prompt establishment of an independent investigative mechanism to investigate all human rights violations leading up to and since the death of Jina Mahsa Amini. I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks, Mr. Rehman.